Hi everyone, welcome back to the Bodice Sew Along Day 2. We have all of our fabric cut, all of our pieces cut out, and we are ready to start sewing, so I'm really excited. Today we are going to be assembling the bodice. So you're going to need your lining pieces. I'm going to turn down the light a little bit. Your center front and center back pieces. Your side bodice pieces. So if you have the color blocked, you'll have the bottom side pieces and the top side pieces. If you are not doing the color blocked version, you'll just have 4 side pieces. You'll have 8 of each flitter that you're wanting. And your side bows or ties. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our lining pieces. So we have 2 mirror image back lining pieces and 1 front lining piece. Get rid of these. So we're going to take the front lining piece and we're going to line up the shoulder seams of our back bodice pieces to our front bodice pieces. And we are going to sew along the shoulder seams here. I like to sew at a length of 2 for bodice construction. So now what we're going to do is we are going to take our seam allowance and press it open. What that means is I'm going to separate the 2 sides of my seam allowance and press it flat. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our center front and center back pieces. So you should have 2 center back pieces like this. 1 center front piece, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to match up the shoulder seams and sew them here and here. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bring it over to the ironing board and press our seams open flat. Next, we're going to take our side pieces. So if you are doing the color blocked version like I am, you're going to have 2 top side back pieces, 2 top side front pieces. I like to keep them with their pattern pieces just so I don't get them mixed up. And then you'll have 4 bottom pieces. So make sure when you are putting these together that the notch that you made on your bottom pieces go on the opposite side of the arm sky. The arm sky is here and here, and we're going to make sure the notch goes down on this side. Okay, so now these are all going to be mirror image. And what we're going to do is take our pieces and put them right sides together. So we're going to be sewing the pieces together like this. But we're going to put them right sides together to sew. just going to sew a straight line across here with that 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, and then for each piece, we are going to fold our seam allowance downward and press. Alright, so I have my seam allowances pressed down, and the next thing we're going to do is take one from each of these piles, so one back side panel and one front side panel, and we are going to sew them at the shoulder seams. So if you are doing, if you're not doing the color block version, if you're just doing the solid side panels, we are at the same spot now. So this is the same for everyone who's doing the flutters. So we're going to take one top, we're going to take one side front and one side back and put them right sides together. And we're going to make sure that they have the arm skies lined up, and we are going to sew along the shoulder seam. And then we are going to press our seam allowance open again. So separate the seam allowance and press it flat. And we'll do the same thing with the other side. So the next thing we're going to do is our flounces. I'm going to go ahead and unpin mine. So I'm going to be doing the double flutter, but I will just show you how to do it with my largest one. So I have 8 flounce pieces here, and that's because we are going to be sewing 2 of them together. So front and back of the bodice will have a flounce, and then we will be doing the exact same thing for the lining, and we need 2 of those. So that equals 4 pieces. So the way we do that is we take 2 of our flounce pieces and line up the large end of the flounce, and we're just going to sew this large end with our 3/8 inch seam allowance and at a 2 length. And we're going to press our seam allowance open, so that means we are going to be spreading it and pressing it flat. We're going to be doing the exact same thing with all of our flounce pieces. So I have 2 flounce pieces here that I'll sew together for the lining of the last one. 2 pieces here that I'll sew together for the main of the next side of the bodice, and then 2 to line that one. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to sew each of these down the long side, and then we're going to line them. So now that I have all of those put together, I have 4 flounce pieces. 1, they each look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we're going to work on lining them. So we're going to take 2 of those 4 pieces, and we're going to match up the seams right side together. And this is the really important part. We are going to pin, starting from the center all the way down the long outer curved part. Don't try to do this without pinning, because since it's cut on a curve, we are cutting on the bias of the non-stretch fabric. And if they get shifted out at all, one end is going to end up being a lot longer than the other end. So the pinning is very important with these flounces. Okay, we made it down one side. Now we're going to go back to the center and pin down the other side. Alright, so I've got it all pinned up. Now we're going to sew around this long outer curve. Now, if you are not confident with sewing curves, I can teach you a little trick. So the first thing I do is backstitch, of course, but then if you ever find that you are getting your seam allowance is getting a little bit too small, you can put your needle in the down position, lift up your foot, and maneuver the fabric around so that you get back to your seam allowance. The other thing I like to do with curves is I guide the fabric from the back to get it to go around that curve. Voila! So now that we have that outer curve sewn, the next thing we need to do is clip our curves. So I have pinking shears here that I use. You can see they are kind of zigzagged a little bit. If you don't have that, I suggest you cut little V's all the way around in your seam allowance so that it will lay properly. I just cut my seam allowance with my pinking shears, which are upside down for some reason. If you don't have a pair of pinking shears and you do a lot of sewing with wovens, it is a game changer. It is so much faster than cutting all those little V's into your fabric all the way along these flounces. Then once we're done cutting our curves, we're going to turn it right side out and press. And we'll do the same thing with the other flounces. There we go. And whatever you do, do not clip through your sewn stitch, because then you'll have to start the ruffle all over again. Okay, so we are just turning it right sides out now. We're going to press it, and we are going to top stitch it. The top stitching is not necessary. You can choose to opt out if you don't feel like changing your thread or if you don't like the look of it. So there we go. I'm going to press it and then we will top stitch it. Okay, so now I have my flounce all turned right side out and pressed, and it's looking very nice. So now we are going to top stitch along that pressed seam that we just did. So we're going to do that with a length of 3 for top stitching and a seam allowance of 1/8 inch. There we go. So we're going to do that exact same thing for the other flutter pieces that we have. And I'll meet you back here to attach it to our bodice. Okay, now what I like to do is I like to baste my two ruffles, my two flounces, sorry, together. So I'm just going to pin those. Oh my gosh, the light is awful. I'm going to pin them together, raw edges matching up and the center seam matching up. Okay, now I have my main bodice, which is attached at the shoulder seams, my main center bodice, and I'm going to take one of my flutters that I have pinned together, and I'm going to baste it to my bodice. So I'm going to baste it along this edge of my bodice so that it will be wedged between the bodice side and the bodice center pieces. So we're going to start doing that with matching up the center seam with the shoulder seam. And this part is going to take a lot of pins, as many pins as you can possibly use. I highly recommend. Okay, so again we're going to start in the middle and go out toward the bottom of the bodice, because at the end we will have a little bit of leftover flounce. Okay, so I have about 2 inches extra on my large flounce and about 1 inch extra or so on my small flounce on that side. So I'm going to do the same on this side. I'm just going to work my way down the bodice, pinning my flounce as I go. The same amount left over on that side. Okay, so now to lay that flat, you can see I have a nice flounce here, and I'm going to baste that on with a stitch length of 3. Okay, so the trick to this is to make sure you do not stretch your bodice pieces. If you do, you'll end up with kind of like a rumply bodice. So just keep it nice and flat and just kind of maneuver the flounce with your fingers. Okay, so now our bodice pieces should look like this. So we're going to do the exact same thing with the other side of the bodice, and then we're going to work on our side bows and side ties. Okay, so now we're going to work on our side bows. So for our side bows, we have one piece for the bow centers and 8 pieces for the bows. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take 2 bow pieces and put them right sides together. Then we are going to sew up one long side, across the short side, and down the other long side. We're going to keep our needle in the down position when we get to the corners and pivot our fabric around the needle with our presser foot up. For the bows, we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a length of 2. Okay, now we're going to cut the corners so that they lay nice and pretty. Turn it right side out. Make sure to push out those corners as best you can. I like to use a crochet hook sometimes, or sometimes I just use a pencil. Go. And we're going to press that flat. Okay, we're going to do that for every single one of the bow pieces. You should have 4 of those when you're done. For the bow centers, we are going to fold it right sides together, lengthwise, like this, and we're just going to sew down the raw long edge. Okay, and then we will turn that up and press. Okay, so I have pressed my bow center so that the seam is at the back and not at the side. And the next thing we need to do is cut this into 3 inches. So we're going to need our measuring tape. And our scissors. I'm going to mark 3 inches and cut. And 3 inches. And cut. Okay, we can discard that extra and move on. So now I have my bodice side pieces here, and I'm going to put my bow pieces basted onto my bodice pieces. So basically, whether you're doing the ties or bows, you're going to be doing it on the inside of the bodice. So not on the side that has the arm sky. We're going to be matching the raw edge up to the inside edge of the bodice sides. We're going to make sure that the bow is 1/2 inch above the bottom of the bodice. I don't know if you can see. This is the bottom of my bodice, and my bow is about 1/2 inch above that. If you're doing the color blocked bodice, it just so happens that it matches up at that seam between your bottom and top bodice pieces. We're just going to pin that, paste. Okay, and then we're just gonna baste each of these on. Okay, so now I have each of my bow pieces basted onto my bodice. And I finally figured out the lighting also. Okay, and I have my bow centers already done, and we are just going to go ahead and set those aside for now while we go over the ties. So now I'm going to go over how to do the side ties. So first we're going to take one of our side tie pieces and we're going to fold it lengthwise in half, right sides together, and we're going to press it really nicely. Then we're going to take one of the corners that does not have the fold on it, so raw edges on both sides of the corner, and we're going to fold it down toward the folded side of the tie at a 45-degree angle so that the short raw edge is laying nicely with the fold, and we're going to press that. Okay, so it's going to look like this, and we're going to press it really nicely, and it's going to make a crease along here that we're going to use as a guide to sew. So we're going to sew starting at the bottom all the way up the long side and then down that crease that we made into this corner. I'm using a stitch length of 2 and a seam allowance of 1/4 inch. Okay, so I've made it to my fold. My needle's in the down position. I'm going to lift up my presser foot, pivot, and start heading toward the corner on that fold. Okay. Now I'm going to take my pinking shears and I'm going to cut off that whole corner, just like that, because we've got it on an angle. And I'm going to cut my corner here as well so that it lays nice and flat. And I'm going to take my trusty pencil and I'm going to turn that right side out. Okay, I'm going to go back in with the pencil and push out my corners so they're nice and crisp. Just like that. And then we're going to press that flat. And now we have a nicely pressed side tie piece. You can top stitch that all the way around if you want to. And we'll move on. Now that we have our ties done, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the bows if you watched that part. We're going to put the tie pieces onto our side bodice pieces. So the way we do that is we're going to want to make sure that the long end is on the top and the short end is on the bottom. And we're going to sew it to the opposite side of the bodice from the arm sky. So we're doing it in kind of the center of the bodice. And we're going to measure up 1 inch from, or 1/2 inch, sorry, from the bottom of the bodice. Just like that. And we'll pin it in place. Same on this side. We're going to make sure the long end is on the top. There we go, and then after we have them all pinned, we are going to baste them in place. stitch length of 3. Have it. In the next step, we're going to be putting the bodice pieces together. Okay, so now we're going to put the bodice together. So we're going to take our bodice center pieces. We're going to make sure it's the right way, that the front sides are with the front center. I like to lay it out the way that I want it to be when it's complete, so that I know that I'm matching everything up properly. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're just going to take one of these sides and we're going to flip it on top of the bodice. We're going to match up our center seam, like that, pin it in place. And then we're going to pin it all the way down the bodice to the bottom. Making sure that the tie stays the way that we stitched it on there and keeps out of the way. It's very important. Okay, so it'll look something like that when it's all pinned. And then with a construction stitch, which is a length of 2, we're going to sew all the way up the back and down the front. And we're going to do that with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And this is important because this stitch is actually going to affect the fit of your garment, so you want to make sure that you are doing the right seam allowance. Okay, so now you can press that flat and work on the other side. So I have it laid out the way that I want it to be when it's finished, and I'm just flipping the side piece over on top of the center bodice piece, matching up the center seams, and doing it all over again. Okay, so now I have my bodice main all put together. I have my flutters on, I have my side ties on, I have my side bodice pieces sewn to my center bodice pieces. And the next thing we want to do is press the flutters out toward the arm skies, just like I have it here. And then we are going to top stitch all along here and here to keep our seam allowance tucked underneath the center bodice, to keep our flutters in the correct position so they don't try to flip forward when whoever is wearing it. Okay, so to top stitch I like to use a stitch length of 3. Some people like to use 4. And we are going to use a seam allowance of 1/8 of an inch from the seam that we are top stitching. And there we have it. Okay, so we have just finished top stitching our main bodices so that the flutters lay as they should. If you're doing the side ties version, your main bodice should look something like this. And if you are doing the side bows, your bodice will look something like this. We've got our bow pieces here. And the last thing we have to do to finish off our main bodices is we have some extra flutter hanging below our bodice bottoms. So all we're going to do with that is we're just going to chop that straight across, being very careful not to cut your bodice. You can use a ruler and a rotary cutter if you prefer. I'm just using scissors. And we'll do the front bodice as well. And I'll do my other bodice while I'm at it. And if, like me, you are looking at your bodice going, that looks a little plain, now is a good time to embroider that front center piece. It's the perfect canvas for something like that. I think I will put some kind of embroidery design on mine. You can do that beforehand as well, but I think I'm going to do mine now. And that is it for day 2. Thanks so much for joining me again, and I will see you tomorrow.